Sometimes the most meaningful gifts or decorations aren't just regular old family pictures. I'm talking about your treasured high school football jersey, a ticket from your first concert, or a flyer for a loved one's art show. These are your most sentimental possessions, and they can be protected and immortalized by the perfect frame. You know, I just got an old passport of my dad's framed. He died a couple years ago, and I don't know why. This really spoke to me. Luckily, FrameBridge makes it easy and affordable to custom frame just about anything. Just pick the perfect frame for your piece from their curated selection of styles, and their design experts will do the rest. And they'll ship it right to your doorstep for free on orders over $100. Best of all is FrameBridge's happiness guarantee. If you're not 100% happy with your piece for any reason, they'll make it right. Visit framebridge.com or one of 8 local FrameBridge stores at 14th Street, Union Market, Georgetown, Bethesda, Old Town, Clarendon, McLean, or the Mosaic District, and start framing.
No, I'm doomed to never talk about anything that's not this. I've been covering it since 2019, and they're still not at a resolution.
This bill's about to go to college before you stop covering it.
It's working on it.
Today on CityCast DC. It's finally done. The DC Council passed the 2026 budget, but not without some hiccups along the way. Alex Koma from WAMU takes us inside the Wilson Building to tell us what those hiccups were and what DC will be spending our tax dollars on next year. Today is Tuesday, July 29th. I'm senior producer Julia Karen, and here's what DC is talking about. Alex, thank you so much for being here. One thing that we know is that Martin Ostermuhle, he does love to tweet during a council meeting, and he tweeted that yesterday afternoon, the DC Council operated on delayed standard time, which is true, but we are finally here. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Always a treat to talk more about the DC budget after watching DC budget hearings for several hours. It's great.
Doing the Lord's work, truly. So first of all, can you fill me in on why there was such a long delay? How did this happen? Why are we recording this so late?
Yeah, well, this was the second and final DC budget vote, and the rule generally is that the more horse trading that there needs to be happening before the lawmakers go up there and vote, the more we get into delayed standard time, as Martin puts it. And that was certainly the case on Monday. There are several measures that, were really attracting a lot of debate. First and foremost, of course, is on Initiative 82 and on the changes to the tip minimum wage, which I know we talked about last time when we were recapping the budget. And, it was a narrow vote this time around. And so I fully expect that there was some arm twisting and all the rest on that and many of the other issues that were up for the, concluding vote on the most important thing the council does each year, which is the budget.
So we know that I-82 was going to be one of those top line things coming out of these budget discussions. Obviously, you said that there was horse trading. Where did the horses eventually trade to? Where did council land on I-82? Are we sticking with a tipped minimum wage? Is the will of the voters getting overturned? Where exactly did we land?
The short answer to both of those questions is somehow yes. This was billed as a compromise struck by at-large councilmember Christina Henderson and Ward 6 councilmember Charles Allen, two of the people who were sort of, right on the edge of, wanting to support I-82 and phasing out the tip minimum wage, but also recognizing that they wanted to see some changes to it. This was not like last time around when you'll recall it was more of the outright opponents to I-82, like Kenyon McDuffie and Brooke Pinto, who are putting together a compromise. This time it's people who are a little more in that middle ground. And so what you got was a little more of a middle ground. So in this case, what I-82 would have done was phased out the tip minimum wage entirely by 2027, increasing the base wage for tipped workers such that it met the full minimum wage, someday that any minimum wage worker would get. Right now, about $17.75 an hour. So this does not do that. It does keep increasing, the base wage. It keeps the current rate of $10 an hour, with, tips on top of that. But it does, slowly, much more slowly than Initiative 82 raises the wage, all the way until it gets to 75% of the standard minimum wage in 2034. So that's 7 additional years. And it does not get as high as Initiative 82 let it go, with the idea being that this gives restaurants more time to plan. If they're struggling with labor costs, this means they've got even more time to make adjustments. It's not the sudden shocks that they feared with Initiative 82 when the base wage would go up by something like $2 every year. These are changes that happen every other year, for instance. And there was supposed to be, additional studies done too of pay stubs to see, how much wage theft is really indeed happening, since so much of Initiative 82 was designed at preventing wage theft, which is where, employers are supposed to pay the difference between the full minimum wage and the tip minimum wage if workers don't earn that with tips. A lot of workers say that doesn't end up happening. So the council wants to collect more data, see if this is really that much of a problem. These are salves to the restaurant workers union, who still wasn't happy with this compromise.
I was going to say one of those data points that got brought up over the weekend was there was this article that got published saying that 900-ish jobs were lost in the restaurant industry. I imagine that had something to do with the jockeying and why we got the result we got.
Yeah, a huge part of these fights have been over which numbers you choose to believe. There are tons of studies done largely by the restaurant industry that will show you that, as you say, all these restaurants are closing and they're attributing it to rising labor costs. All of these jobs are lost because of that. But then there's counter arguments advanced by the union, even by the council's own budget office, that shows, for all these restaurants that have closed, a lot have opened and a lot have figured out how to balance this. And the council's analysis actually found that the industry has added jobs since Initiative 82 was passed. So, yeah, it's kind of a choose your own adventure. A lot of council members stressed they wanted to look at the data. This was a refrain of many of them. But as ever, it's about whose data you believe.
Remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer? With the perfect latte and the crazy view? Or that sweet hiking spot your friend told you about, but you can't quite remember the name? With Overlook Maps, special places never get lost again. Create personal lists of places that you've been and want to go. Build your must-visit list for your next vacation, your foodie favorites for date night, or your weekend getaways for when you just need to escape. Planning a trip with friends? Create a shared list where everyone can add their ideas. Visiting a new city? Check out lists from locals who know the real gems, not just the tourist traps. And here's the best part. No ads cluttering your lists. No one selling your data to advertisers. Just your personal collection of amazing places organized exactly how you want them. Overlook Maps. Collect, organize, and share the places that matter to you. Download free at overlookmaps.com. And check out overlookmaps.com/DC to see some of our lists and great spots on a map and in your pocket. Your places, your way.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Another big thing that we were watching was for I-83, which was the ranked choice voting initiative that was passed. And this was supposed to be able to fund it. Where did we end up on funding or not funding ranked choice voting?
Yeah, a lot of sound and fury that signified nothing ultimately here. At the last meeting 2 weeks ago, I-83 was indeed funded, at least the portion that would allow for ranked choice voting. That is not going to be the other component of I-83, which allows for open primaries. So there was an attempt by some council members who don't support ranked choice voting, Wendell Felder and Anita Bonds. They wanted to do what was called an implementation study that would have, caused the Board of Elections to have to go back and take even more time to figure out whether or not they could do this and what it would take to do this. And crucially, a report would not be due until September of 2026. So that essentially means there's no chance that would go into effect for the November elections that year, which are the really big ones. The mayor, the chair of the council, the attorney general, a bunch of council members all on the ballot. And council members looked at this pretty skeptically and they said, we know what's going on here. The Board of Elections has in fact already done a lot of work to determine determine, whether or not what it needs to do, how ready that it is for ranked choice voting. And they said, we're not buying this. So they put that off. Now, the interesting thing here is that Ward 2 councilmember did try Monday to fund the other half of Initiative 83, which would open party primaries to independent voters. And that very nearly succeeded, but it ultimately failed, falling just two votes short of what it needed. And that was, definitely a controversial piece. I think the I-83 supporters really had hoped that they had found the votes to get that passed. But, it got tied up in politics. Not only people opposed to I-83, but it would have required pulling a lot of money from the National Cherry Blossom Festival. And that, didn't exactly win a lot of fans who love the cherry blossoms.
I was going to say, I feel like pulling money from anywhere, the cherry blossoms, you must leave them unscathed.
Yeah, well, Brooke Pinto's rationale was like, I wanted to pick a project that's in my ward, one that won't affect, she's not going into somebody else's backyard and screwing up funding for something they support. So I appreciate where she's coming from, but you add all that on top of the existing concerns about I-83, where you have even some people who support ranked choice voting don't support open primaries. Zachary Parker, the Ward 5 council member, he voted for ranked choice voting and against open primaries. That's exactly the sort of split that we saw all throughout the I-83 debate that I know we talked about on this show many times, where, longtime Democrats are nervous about seeing independents come into their party primaries.
I know that Brooke Pinto was extremely active in terms of being, recommending amendments and such on the council. One thing she tried to add last minute was an amendment on Chinatown. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so she is basically hoping that a new hotel that's being built in the area can sort of, with a few select, incentives to get the project moving, also, deliver a lot of results that people have been asking for in Chinatown for some time, among them being a requirement that they bring an Asian grocer into the area. People in China, there aren't that many Chinese residents left in Chinatown, but for those that are frustrated that they have to go out to the suburbs if they want to get to an H Mart or something that has, ingredients for the stuff they want to cook. And so the city has for some time now been exploring how to, work with for perhaps Chef Kevin Tien, who runs Moon Rabbit downtown, to try and make that happen. So Brooke Pinto is sort of seeing this as a chance to get this project, moving while also delivering on some of the priorities of the residents of Chinatown who fear being displaced by the persistent development of the area that often comes at the expense of legacy Chinese businesses. And that passed by a pretty wide margin, even if though there were some council members concerned. So could be some interesting changes coming downtown.
Were there any major surprises regarding any of the votes, or did people vote and council members vote the way that you expected them to, despite all of the horse trading and jockeying?
What was interesting Monday is that, even though we took a tremendous amount of time to get here, I wouldn't say that any of the votes were ultimately a surprise. You had a lot of 7-5 votes that were, divided right on, the knife's edge of something succeeding, but, nothing that I think would struck anyone as odd. Take I-82, there was some chatter early in the day that, that maybe they didn't have the votes to get that passed, but ultimately that came together, on I-83, there was some, thought that maybe open primaries could get over the hump, but they just couldn't get there. A third one that I'd call out is Zachary Parker proposed a capital gains tax, basically increasing the tax on these large, stock transactions, for instance, in order to fund the child tax credit and new housing vouchers. That there had been some chatter that, maybe that would have the votes to make it pass, but again, fails 5-7. So the final budget that passed really isn't all that different from the one that did 2 weeks ago. Really, the biggest thing is I-82, and I think everybody recognized there would be an effort to forge some sort of compromise. It's just whether the one that was advanced Monday ended up, sort of getting over the finish line.
So one of these compromises was obviously cleaving the commander's deal from this budget. That is supposed to get voted on by the end of the week. Did you get any council chatter yesterday that might tell you any more about how that vote is going to go down?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that RFK vote is happening so soon is something that, candidly, a lot of people on the council weren't expecting as recently as a few weeks ago. You can really see that Council Chair Phil Mendelson is feeling some of the heat from the commanders, from Mayor Muriel Bowser to get this deal done quickly. I think a lot of people on the council, so certainly not all, were happy to push this off deeper into the fall. And there still will be a second vote in September. The vote on August 1st, will be just the first of two needed. But I think it was a sort of a sign to the team that, look, we're taking your timeline concerns seriously. We do want to get this done soon. That being said, several council members have been very clear that there's still things that they want to see changed. And so will that mean that they end up getting them changed before the vote on Friday, or will that have to wait until the second vote in September? That's kind of TBD. I think it's very possible that you see some council members try and get this amended on the dais, on Friday, where they're saying, look, we need more labor protections, more environmental protections. Some of them are asking for anti-displacement measures for the communities around the stadium, freezing property taxes for legacy residents, that sort of thing. All of these, I think, are in the picture. And I think because the vote is likely to be such a pretty, narrow margin that some of these council members, like a Zachary Parker or Robert White, can, use that, influence of saying, you need my vote on this because it's going to take a few extra votes than normal because of some complex council rules. This is going to take 8 votes, not your simple 7. I think that there's a room for a lot more of the aforementioned horse trading here.
As a sports fan, I have to confess. Sometimes the game gets kind of boring. That's when I unfold my Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 and use multi-window viewing on its large screen. Boring game? I'm checking out my fantasy baseball league at the same time. Score still 1-0? I'm replying to emails in the other window, scoring points with the boss. Semifinals finally getting exciting? I'm buying tickets to the finals and booking my flights. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
So one thing that caught my eye yesterday was that Trayon White, the former Ward 8 council member and also future Ward 8 council member, was in the building. What was that like for council members? Because the last time that they had seen him in those chambers was when they voted him off the council.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty clear message that Trayon was sending by showing up Monday. I mean, it's throughout this process, a lot of people on, both sides of the pro-Trayon, anti-Trayon debate in Ward 8 have said, it sucks that we don't have a voice on the council for the most consequential thing that the council does, which is the budget. It's a ward that needs a tremendous amount of help, and they need someone speaking up in the room for Ward 8 residents. Now, I would say Trayon White had a mixed track record at best of standing up for Ward 8 residents when it come budget time, considering he took several vacations during budget votes in past years. But that being said, this was clearly a message, is staring across the dais to say, don't forget about me. I'm probably going to be seated on the council in time for the second RFK vote, which is hanging over all of this. He said that he supports the stadium, for the record, but would like to see more concessions for his ward. So yeah, pretty hard to miss the meaning there. And several times you did have people saying on things like, the Rental Act, which was this big changes to rights for tenants in the city. This wasn't part of the budget, but it's going to affect Ward 8 a tremendous amount. And several council members, in arguing for a delay of a consideration on that bill, said, shouldn't we wait until that guy in the audience right there is sitting up there with us? That's obviously a risky proposition in its own right, considering the federal bribery charges still pending against him. But it was certainly on everyone's minds Monday.
Did he have anything to say about the budget specifically when he was there?
He didn't say anything Monday, as far as I know, but he has spoken several times about this budget to say that it's failing Ward 8. He's used that as part of his campaign, right? To say, you need someone fighting for Ward 8. I've got the relationships. Only I can do it. Leave aside the fact that he's been in office for a decade. And, if you're not happy with the progress made for Ward 8, that's kind of attributable to one particular council member. But yeah, you look at the cuts to human services, you look at the cuts to, health insurance. These are major issues. Or rental assistance. They're going to fall really hard on Ward 8. And so he sounded the alarm, as have several other council members, but none of them really found any money to do anything about it.
So I'm curious to hear from you, because you're someone who watches the council kind of like a hawk, does a huge public service for us. You watch all of these hours of the council. What kind of moment would you say the council is in right now?
They are in a very uncertain moment where I think they are still really struggling with how to, how much they want to stand up to both the mayor and the federal government and President Trump. And they consistently complain about the changes that have been foisted upon them by both of these parties. In the case of Trump, it's, he's cutting all these federal jobs, making the economy worse. In the case of the mayor, it's, she's sort of mastered using a variety of procedural tricks to get her way. And she's not happy, or they're not happy when they see her do this. And, persistently, they make a big show of complaining about these things. And yet, you see them, I think, a little afraid of their own shadow, because they're not sure, how much do I want to get a tussle with a relatively popular mayor? How much do I want to get into a tussle with a president whose party controls both houses of Congress and could interfere with the district's ability to govern itself? So you see, they're really pulled in a lot of different directions. And I don't know that there is any one clear way. You see them taking some steps that progressives might like, some steps moderates might like. It's sort of muddled. It's hard to find one particular, clear vision. This could all change entirely by the time next year rolls around. And maybe we have a new mayor. Maybe we have Democrats controlling one house of Congress. And, there isn't the same threat to home rule. But for now, it's, I think that's maybe part of the reason why you see a 8-hour or so long budget vote when it normally takes half that amount of time is, nobody's happy.
I know when they talk about shaving money away, typically that comes in the form of social programs, things like Medicaid, medicine, education, something like that. Where are some cuts going to happen, and who's that going to impact?
Yeah, a lot of this was kind of baked into the budget in what Mayor Bowser first proposed, so we're not talking about it as much right now. But the council made a few changes on the margins, but the basics remain the same. There is going to be something like 25,000 people kicked off of Medicaid by changing eligibility rules in the city. There's going to be another 34,000 or so people who lose health insurance through a program called the DC Healthcare Alliance. That's essentially for people who fall in this gap between they're not quite far enough down the income spectrum to qualify for Medicaid, but maybe they don't make enough money to afford private insurance, or they don't have a job that offers private insurance. So they're in this weird little gap. That's affecting a tremendous number of people, including undocumented people. That's a program that people can apply for regardless of their immigration status. And House Republicans were sort of, shaking their, rubbing their hands together to get their hands and make cuts to that one. So the city kind of tried to preempt them. There's also a lot of cuts to things like services for if you are having trouble affording rent. Emergency rental assistance is seeing a big cut. The city is really pulling back from many of its programs meant to help the homeless, like vouchers to get people off the street or help them afford rent. Just over and over again, and Zachary Parker observed this, his signature program, child tax credit was getting cut. Kenny McDuffie's signature program, a baby bonds, wealth building program was getting cut. These are programs meant to help people who are not doing quite so well. And these are the ones that really took it on the chin, because that's where a huge amount of the social spending is. And if DC isn't willing to bring more money in, that's what's going to take it on the chin first.
I know that there were also protesters at the Wilson building. Were some of these cuts part of those protests, or was it related to something else?
It was mainly, I mean, certainly they were upset about the social services cuts, but their main source of ire was on I-82. You actually saw several times they were interrupting council members. They were, making a big scene. This is a staple of any consequential budget vote at the Wilson Building. You even had, at one point, Council Chair Phil Mendelson just cleared the chamber and said, we're not going to vote with people in the room. If you're going to behave like this, a real, I'll turn this car around situation. Nothing terribly surprising. I mean, for a lot of people, the feelings rung really strong on I-82. They view this is their livelihood. You are cutting wages for workers in their eyes, and they didn't want that. I think even though they probably knew, where the wind was blowing, they didn't want that moment to go unremarked upon. And they certainly didn't. In fact, you could hear them banging on the doors outside of the council chamber as all this went down. And council members were pretty visibly shaken. Christina Henderson saying, like, is someone going to, rush the dais up here? Am I going to be able to finish this? But that's kind of par for the course in big, high consequential lawmaking.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us on Delayed Standard Time. Really appreciate it. And thank you for covering the council for us.
Oh, it's always my pleasure. I can't wait to talk about their next 12-hour-long hearing.
And before we go, shout out to our new CityCast neighbors, Howard M. and Katya E. Thank you so much for joining. And if you, yes, you, want to hear your name read, consider becoming a CityCast neighbor. Just visit membership.citycast.fm. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey DC. It's really great. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.